This is week 17, and it is How High Should We Aspire? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it and your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Brahmachari. The passage this week is from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 5. I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. The easiest explanation for these words is that they were spoken in criticism of the scribes and Pharisees, particularly since Jesus was often verbally attacked by them and stood up to them fearlessly. However, it wouldn't have been much of a challenge to the disciples who aspired to spiritual perfection to tell them, don't be like those who lack any such aspiration. Jesus, in fact, says only a few verses later, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. What Jesus was referring to here, then, was the self-righteousness of the priests. Don't seek perfection, he was saying to his disciples, in the image you project towards others. Don't be satisfied with a goodness born merely of ego definitions. The highest virtue is to transcend the very thought of personal virtue, in the realization of God alone as the doer. Before this realization, even the thought, I am kind, or I am truthful, is self-limiting. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, the 7th chapter, yet hard the wise Mahatma is to find, that man who saith, all is Vasudev. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. I want to start with a story that Swami Kriyananda told. And this story is in the book, A Renunciate Order for the New Age. So, it's coming here. Here we go. There's a story in Indian tradition of a hermit who was disturbed during meditation one day by the cawing of a crow. He glanced up at it in anger, and it fell immediately to the ground, dead. What power I've acquired, thought the hermit proudly. A devata, or an angel, just then appeared to him and said, you think yourself so highly advanced, but there is one who is more advanced than you, living in the town near here. You could learn much from her. A woman? Is that possible? Go and see, said the angel, and instructed him where to find her. The hermit entered the town and, after some time, arrived at a very ordinary home. He considered it beneath him even to enter there. He therefore called out, and a woman answered from within, I will come to you shortly. I am busy just now, serving my husband. She's married? Thought the hermit indignantly. How could a married person possibly be on a higher spiritual plane than I? Just then she called out, be patient, sir. I am not your crow. So she knew about that episode. He decided to wait. When at last she emerged, she spoke from a level of wisdom that did indeed prove enlightening for him. Humbled, he returned to his place of seclusion. The angel hadn't yet finished with him, however. Appearing to him a second time, he said, you've learned something, but not yet everything that you need to know. There is another person in town from whom you still have much to learn. The angel instructed him where to go. The hermit returned to town. This time, he found himself entering the lowest section, where the butchers and leather workers worked and lived. How could any saint possibly live here? He marveled. When he reached the house of the person he was to see, he found it belonged to a young man who, again, hadn't time for him at the moment. He was busy serving his parents. When finally the youth appeared, the hermit learned from him that to do one's God-allotted duty is the highest calling and should never be despised. The important thing is not to become attached to one's duty. This was for him a vitally important lesson. Many renunciates, in forsaking worldly involvement, overlook their duty to serve their broader family of mankind. The renunciate should offer back gratefully to this world the energy and blessings he receives from God. His renunciation should be a means of expanding his sense of selfhood. So I thought that was a nice story that went along with the idea of Christ telling his disciples that they needed to become much more advanced than the Pharisees and the scribes. And in the reading that we just had, that it wasn't that they just had to become more advanced than the average person, because the devotees would have already been wanting to do that they were already devotees of Christ, disciples of Christ. They already would have been striving very high. But Christ was telling them that you have to become super duper perfect. That's all the way to the point of completely renouncing or getting rid of ego altogether. And that's a much higher level than just trying to perfect ourselves outwardly. In fact, the outward perfection, it's important to some degree, because if our lives are too sloppy outwardly, that's a reflection of an inward state of mental confusion, which is, again, a reflection of a confused consciousness or a lower consciousness. And ultimately, we're trying to have a perfect consciousness. However, I want to talk about this, that when I first came to Swami Kriyananda, I was so excited. That's not the right word even. My soul was thrilled. I was so happy that finally I had someone I could come to, someone who absolutely knew what he was doing on the spiritual path, that I could simply open my heart to him and ask him, okay, just tell me what to do. I'll do anything, on the inside and outwardly also. I just felt that I would do anything, and it was so wonderful. I thought, okay, now he'll just tell me, go do A, and I'll go do A, and then I'll come back, and he'll say, okay, go do B, and I'll go do B, and then I'll come back, and he'll say, okay, good job, now you're ready, go do C and D together, and then you'll have samadhi. But he almost really didn't tell me to do anything. He did give me a few tasks here and there, but it just didn't work the way I thought it was going to work. It wasn't about this, go do this perfect thing outwardly, and then this perfect thing outwardly, because the outward show is just an illusion, it's a game. It just spins and spins forever. And we're trying to realize that. We're trying to realize, how do we get off of this eternally spinning wheel? And that's something that comes through realization. So that's something that comes through attunement with a guru or with a saint. And that attunement is on a much deeper level than just go do this outer thing. It's something that you feel in your own self when you're able to get very silent on the inside. That after doing the outer things that the guru tells you to do, and after listening to the discourses and asking questions, you begin to realize that what you really come to that person for is inner silence, and to take that person's consciousness. And you can't take that person's consciousness unless you're still on the inside. And so, outwardly, which is the world and the consciousness that most of us live in, that if one person's talking and you really want to listen to what they're saying, you also can't be talking, and you need to be quiet. And the same way on the inside, that if you really want to receive the consciousness behind someone's words, you can't mentally be chattering away or thinking about other projects that you have to do or thinking about the past. You have to be right there, right in the moment, really listening with your entire soul. And in that way, then, we gain the ability to receive the consciousness of a master. One time, Paramahansa Yogananda told some of his disciples, "You're stealing lots of magnetism. That's very good." And before we can steal magnetism from a saint or from the guru, we have to understand magnetism. And we have to understand that it is conveyed through the eyes. A nice example is that if you spend some time with a person that you don't normally spend time with, and then the next day you say a phrase, and it's a phrase or a word that you normally wouldn't say, that they say, and you almost feel like that person for a moment, if you're sensitive, then you realize, that in being in association and contact with that person, I've taken on a little bit of their magnetism. Anyways, magnetism is conveyed through the eyes, it's conveyed through the sense of touch, Those are the highest channels for it, but it can be conveyed also through other means, by listening to someone's voice or even by looking at a photograph of them. So do strive to understand magnetism so that you can understand how to take on the consciousness of someone whose consciousness you want to take on, and how to politely avoid the consciousness of people whose consciousness you don't want to take on. Another interesting thing about the reading we just had is that Christ, in that reading it said Christ was verbally attacked often by the scribes and the Pharisees. And these were people who simply didn't understand truth. They understood truth in an outward way through the scriptures. There's a fun saying that I like, and it's, even Satan quotes the scriptures. And that's just how difficult Maya is. So the scribes, they understood truth through the outward scriptures, but they didn't understand it from the inside. And so they couldn't understand who Christ was. And so Christ was telling his disciples that you have to strive much higher than the understanding they had. And Christ said that we have to strive to even become perfect, as God is perfect. You know, some days that just seems like quite a tall challenge, that we just think, how is this ever going to be possible? One time Swami Kriyananda was with a group of devotees. Oh, maybe he was in his 50s then, I don't know, I wasn't there, I heard this story secondhand. But let's just say that group of devotees on average was 20-something, maybe 30-something. And Swamiji said to them, don't worry, I'm just a little bit older than you. So, some people may have taken that to think, okay, he's 20 years older than I am or something. Okay. But those who had ears to hear would have known that he meant are many lifetimes older than you. And that too, it can be discouraging, thinking, oh gosh, how many lifetimes is this thing going to take? Or it cannot be. That, you know, as you progress on the spiritual path, one thing that you'll learn to understand is, as you get high enough, that time really is not a factor. That Paramahansa Yogananda said that thoughts, habits, they can be changed in a day. And it's just simply a way of changing your mental habits. And as you meditate every day, as your consciousness rises, you begin to become very aware of all of your thoughts. And you begin to become aware of the thoughts that are working and the thoughts that aren't working. And quickly you can learn to cast out the thoughts that aren't working. And so time then, it starts to not become as much as a factor as it looks like. Because in the beginning, when Paramahansa Yogananda writes in the chapter, The Science of Kriya Yoga, the autobiography of a yogi, that it takes 1,000,000 years for us to achieve enlightenment simply by riding the planet around again and again as it revolves the sun year after year. To achieve this perfect consciousness, it takes 1,000,000 years. But then he goes on to scare us by saying even 2 times 1,000,000 years won't suffice for those who don't live in perfect harmony with nature. He said that 1,000,000 years is if you have perfect health, diseaseless living, and you're in perfect harmony with nature. And so, you know, we're not exactly in perfect harmony with nature the way that we live in cities these days and crowded in different places. But even being in harmony with nature goes deeper than that, of meaning being in tune with God's outward manifestation. So, okay, 2,000,000 years. And sometimes if we get discouraged and we think, well, okay, I'm just going to wait it out. But that plan won't work. Swami Kriyananda, he scared me by talking about someone who went into a past life regression and said that she remembered, I think it was, I don't remember, it was something like her past lives, 40 past lives or something. I don't remember what it was, but the point that Swami made was, he said, oh, those past lives, they extend maybe into 40 million past years. And then in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, he says that we can go on and on for an entire day of Brahma, which is much longer than 40 million years. And now those numbers get scary. That's why you don't want to just think, okay, I'll just wait it out. That we're either going forward or we're going backwards. And so we have to pick up our bow and we have to decide that we're going to fight. That we're going to fight on the level of consciousness. That in every moment of every day, we're going to do the best we can to uplift our consciousness. And now, speaking of that chapter in the Autobiography of a Yogi, one of the best tools that we have is Kriya Yoga. And this tool also helps us understand that time isn't so much of a factor. That by practicing Kriya Yoga, we can accelerate our spiritual evolution, because one Kriya practiced in 30 seconds can be 1 year of spiritual evolution. And a person with a high consciousness told me a very interesting thing also. That in the beginning, when we're huffing and puffing, and our Kriyas aren't so good when we first learn, that probably one Kriya is not equal to 1 year of spiritual evolution. However, as we progress, a person who's very advanced can do one Kriya and go into Samadhi. So his one Kriya might be worth 50,000 years or 100,000 years of evolution in just one simple breath. That is a fascinating point to contemplate as we begin to understand the power of the breath and the power of moving energy within our spine, and the fact that different levels of consciousness reside within our spine, and that we can move through those different levels of consciousness if we learn how to move through our spine. I didn't know how to say that more elegantly, but move our consciousness, move our energy very, very subtly and very precisely, very slowly, with finesse, maybe is what I'm trying to say. So Kriya Yoga is not just pranayama of just deep breathing exercises or something like that. It's a way of learning how to go within and transform our consciousness. So if we have a few weapons that we can learn, and we don't have to be afraid of this statement that we have to become perfect even as God is perfect, that with the tool of Kriya Yoga, if we do our Kriya with concentration and with devotion, and if we have a guru, if we can associate with a saint, there's nothing like it. If we can then attune our consciousness, because that saint has reached this level. That saint knows that he is one with God, that he's not himself anymore. And he's reached a plateau where he can never fall. And this reminds me of another story that I wanted to say about spiritual pride, which is another aspect of this, because the Pharisees and the scribes, they had that spiritual pride, and Christ was saying that we have to go beyond that. I just forgot the point that I wanted to make. So I'll go on to another one, and then hopefully I'll come back to it. And that is Paramahansa Yogananda, that he was saying that how can you have, or he said, someone once told him, "Oh, sir, you're so humble." And he said, "How can there be humility when there's no sense of ego?" And that also is a very interesting point to consider, that because humility is a very fascinating thing. Now, before it slips my mind again, Swami Kriyananda once said that he thought that he achieved this state of Sabikalpa Samadhi, and he said, and that was thousands of years ago. And then he slipped from that. And so pride can be a very dangerous thing. Spiritual pride is nothing like trying to overcome that. Just think that you could reach that height where you can, with it, using your own free will, go breathless whenever you like, merge into a state of omnipresence, of infinity, of oneness with God, then come back to the consciousness of breathing again, of having an ego, and then not be able to get back into that state for thousands of years again. That's terrifying. That is why on the spiritual path we need someone who knows what they're doing. That it's not enough to just read a book and then try to figure this out. It's why we give Kriya Yoga through initiation only. That once someone really starts practicing Kriya Yoga seriously, that we're playing with big things here. And we've already been going probably for those millions of incarnations I was just talking about. If we sincerely want liberation, why should we go around for another million incarnations? That we really should just strive to do our best. And so I'm kind of making this into a serious thing, which, God help us, who wants to be too serious? A sad saint is a sad saint indeed. And on the other hand, we have to flow with life. We have to make our mistakes. We have to get up and try again. That a saint is a sinner who never gave up. We have to remember those words. And in my little experience on the spiritual path, that more than do we fall or do we, just fly up in the clouds is, do we get back up again after we fall? And do we just keep trying? And remember this story of the tortoise and the hare in Aesop's fables. Maybe even that came from Indian fables, but who wants to get into these nationalistic debates? But of course, the tortoise that slowly, just one step at a time, raced with the hare, who went off quickly and then decided to take a little nap under the tree, and then the tortoise won the race. That on the spiritual path, you will win by slowly, one moment at a time, just doing the right thing, one step at a time, one step at a time. And if things go wrong, as they sometimes will, just reevaluate, slowly go back in the right direction. And that right direction is God, God, God. That right direction of the spine is trying to keep our consciousness here at all times. That right consciousness and attitude is having an attitude of kindness, of love towards all, no matter what. You know, Swami Kriyananda used to give us an exercise that I'm afraid I had a really hard time doing. I'm still working on this one. And the exercise was, think of the absolute worst thing you could ever imagine happening to you. It's a scary exercise because we can think of some pretty bad things. Go ahead. Think of the worst thing you could ever imagine happening to you. I'm not even going to give you help. I'm sure you can think of some pretty bad things. Now imagine that you can just take that. It happens. All right. It's okay. It's coming from God. It will pass. It is in the realm of duality, in the realm of time. And we're trying to have a consciousness which goes beyond time and sees everything as temporary. That whatever is temporary is not the highest bliss that we're trying to seek. That God is eternity itself. So you could practice that exercise. It's a little rough. But as I've done my best to practice it, I realized that God is absolutely everything. There was a time when Paramahansa Yogananda told someone, God eats people. That God is all those bad things. But it's a tricky conundrum. We can't go too far on this side to say, okay, well, God's doing all the bad things. He is. But most people that I've seen use that to justify their own bad actions or treating other people kindly. Saying, well, God does bad too. And that's not quite right. Yet, on the other hand, you meet people who just think they're the judge of heaven and are continually quoting the scriptures, like Satan, and telling you, you're a bad person, you do this wrong, you do that wrong. And over there, that doesn't feel quite right either. And we're trying to find the middle ground of that. And it's difficult to find. There's somewhere in the Gita where Krishna tells Arjuna, even the wise become confused on this point. And it's not the point I was just making, it's the point of whether to act or not act. But the point there is that even the wise become confused. And the last thing that we had here is, hard is that Mahatma to find who says, all is Vasudev. And that statement, the first part is that if we can realize that everything is God, everything is Vasudev, we're free. And yes, in the beginning we do that intellectually. We have to contemplate, we have to think of that. That's why I told the story, God eats people, because even God's doing that. But it's not enough to just intellectually understand that. That we have to realize it so that we can stay centered even when the worst thing imaginable happens to us. Another story of Swamiji's was he had a dream that he was tied at the stake and his enemies were setting him on fire. And he calmly just thought, well, it'll hurt for a little bit. There's the flames. All right, but then it will pass. And this is the interesting part of that dream to me. Then his friends came and saved him. But his heart didn't leap up. Oh, thank God, flames are out. I'm safe. He just thought, well, okay, so they saved me. It just didn't matter to him. He passed the test on both sides of the pendulum swing. And that's a fascinating part. That sometimes we can pass the negative side, but then we leap up on the outwardly positive side, and we haven't learned how to stay completely centered within ourselves. Anyways, so all is Vasudev, that we're trying to hold that consciousness. We're trying to strive to have that realization until we realize we already have it. And even in here, Swamiji was going into some of the deeper aspects of what it's like to not have ego, that we're trying to transcend even the thought, I am kind. But it's something that comes in meditation through realization. It's something that comes through the grace that the Guru gives you. You can meditate on it, go ahead, do it. But you're not going to study your way there, like the scribes and the Pharisees. Anyway, the last point I wanted to make was that hard is the Mahatma to find who says all is Vasudeva. That the saints are a very rare thing in this world. So if you happen to come across someone who has this consciousness of omnipresence, or even if you don't meet them in the physical body, but you have the good consciousness, you have the good karma to come to this path, take that karma, run with it. Take Swami Kriyananda's consciousness into your consciousness. Even through the videos, through his music, through his books. Take that consciousness. You never know when this good opportunity might come again. And we can wander for God knows how long. We've had enough wandering. So whenever you get this opportunity, seize the day, as the Greek saying goes, and then do your best and give the results to God. Nishkam karma. It's the way to be. Meditate on that. And we will get there, one slow step at a time. It's been a joy having this satsang this evening. God bless your journey.